Have you ever thought about the pecking order in the Catholic Church's burial practices? A question not typically part of an everyday conversation, but fascinating nonetheless. In days gone by, there was a clear hierarchy when it came to burying the dead. The most esteemed individuals would be laid to rest at the front of the cemetery, while those considered less important were placed towards the back. Consider Aidan's grave, for instance. It's been close to 60 years since his burial, and his resting place was right at the back of the graveyard. Behind his grave, the area was completely overgrown, hinting at a sort of isolation. Between his grave and the main burial ground, there was an expansive, almost empty space. Over time, the graveyard has evolved. The space in front of Aidan's grave is now filled, and the area that was once overgrown behind him has been cleared. A transformation that perhaps mirrors societal changes in attitude towards death and the afterlife. This hierarchy of burial practices, as intriguing as it is, also brings to light some unusual stories. Stories that challenge our understanding of social hierarchies and the value of human life. One such story is that of Joe Macadoni, a man whose life and death unfolded in the most peculiar ways. Interestingly, this brings us to the peculiar story of Joe Macadoni. In the small town of Markethill, a man named Joe Macadoni lived an unusual life. This solitary figure was something of a local enigma, a hermit tucked away in the heart of the community. He ran a quaint little hardware shop at the top of town, a place filled with everything from nails to saucepans, all neatly displayed in the front window. Now, Joe wasn't one for socializing. Every Sunday, like clockwork, he'd take a solitary walk to Mullabrack, attending chapel alone. No family, no friends, just Joe and his quiet thoughts. He'd sit in a pew by himself, a silent observer to the world around him, and then he'd return home, alone again. Rumors swirled around Joe like leaves in the wind. Whispers painted him as a man on the run, a fugitive from the mafia in Italy or America, yet no one knew for certain. The truth of Joe's past was as elusive as the man himself. He was a puzzle, a mystery wrapped in the shell of an ordinary man. And then, in the 60s, Joe passed away. With no relatives and seemingly little wealth, his body was laid to rest in the farthest corner of the graveyard, as far from the grandeur of the front as could be. Joe's life was shrouded in mystery, and so was his death, his. When Joe passed away in the 60s, he was buried in the farthest corner of the graveyard, reflecting his seemingly unimportant social status. His solitary life and lack of relatives left a void that was filled with assumptions of poverty and insignificance. But as the saying goes, never judge a book by its cover. And Joe's story was about to take an unexpected turn. After Joe was laid to rest in the humblest spot in the cemetery, a solicitor emerged from the shadows with news that sent shockwaves through the community. This unassuming man, Joe Macadoni, had left a substantial sum of money to the Mullabrack Church. This revelation was like a bolt from the blue, shattering the preconceived notions about Joe and his life. The community was engulfed in disbelief, and a fair amount of shame started to creep in. The very people who had assumed Joe was destitute were now faced with the reality that he was, in fact, a benefactor of their church. The irony was not lost on them. Such was the magnitude of Joe's unexpected legacy that whispers started to circulate about moving his body. The idea was to give him a more prominent resting place, a stark contrast to the remote corner where he was initially buried. This was a way to rectify the perceived injustice, a gesture to show respect to a man who had silently contributed so much to their community. But did they go ahead with it? Did they move Joe closer to the front, to a place of honor amongst the important dearly departed? We don't have the answer to that. There were talks, but no one knows what really happened. Maybe they just put a headstone on his grave and left it where it was. A silent tribute to the man who lived quietly but left a loud legacy. In the end, we don't know if Joe's resting place was changed, but his story serves as a striking reminder of the unexpected twists life can present.